Hello there, everybody, and welcome to the Entertainment Headquarters. And it is a very special review time. And joining me all the way from the Metal Tavern Radio, my good friend and fellow co-host a lot on the channel, Mr. DJ Anubis. Yes, he's all the way from the Metal Tavern Radio, so check that channel out, please. And also joining us, another fellow YouTuber, and he's also, Mr. Retro YouTuber. He's great with all his retro content, especially his movie and television trivia on his Sunday night live chats. Mr. Thrashpondo Pons, welcome.
A pleasure to be here, Kevin.
It's a pleasure to have you on the channel. You and me, the last time we were together on this channel, did a retro kaiju review on the film Them, 1954, which was a blast. And so I had to have you back on the channel, but I wanted you to join me and Anubis because, particularly for this review, because I know you're a huge fan of this show, the original from the 1980. And obviously, have you read the book that this was based on?
I must confess I have not. In fact, in a perfect world, I wanted to go out and read the novel before I was here today. Just I didn't have the time. So I still am unable to compare either miniseries to the James Clavell classic. The only thing I've actually read by James Clavell is The Last Valley, which I love, but has nothing to do with, his entire Japanese saga. It's set in Central Europe.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really help.
Well, he sounds like he's got a theme there, the director, like you say, with the Japanese culture and his novelization. So the show, of course, what we're here to talk about is none other than a show that was nicknamed by a lot of fans is an epic, period drama on the level of the Game of Thrones. And it is, of course, Shogun. And it was on FX. Over here in the UK, it was on Disney Plus. And, it's a fantastic show with a lot of twists and turns and a lot of political drama, a lot of, character drama, and a little bit of samurai action and bloodshed. So, first thing I'll ask, I always ask this question. I'll go to DJ Anubis. What was your first reaction when you first heard about them bringing back Shogun?
Well, like Thrash, I mean, I remember when Shogun came out in the 80s. Now, I didn't remember too much from it. I just remember it actually existed. It was a big deal in the 80s. I think it went for like 2 or 3 nights. It was like a limited series, wasn't it, initially?
I think it was, I want to say 5 nights. I think
5 nights. It makes sense if it was, yeah. But I don't remember watching too much of it. Didn't really know anything much about it. So, but when the new one came out, big fan of Sanada, of course. So, and he's directing a lot of it and whatnot. So, I was really excited to check it out because, technology and where we are with, with Asian movies and stuff becoming more in the forefront now than in the past. So I was really excited to check it out, but I came in knowing nothing about what it was about or what the series was about.
Yeah. So how about you, Thrash? Can you remember the first time you seen Shogun, and what was your reaction when you heard that they were bringing this back in a modern day remake?
I was like 13 when it came out, and I remember I had just discovered Japanese culture, particularly the feudal period, when it came out. So it was like, it was just what the doctor ordered. And I absolutely loved the original. So when I heard that a remake was coming up, I was like over the moon for it, particularly because as my understanding of Japanese history became more in tune with what actually happened, I realized while Shogun, the original with Richard Chamberlain, was great entertainment, it was not exactly historically accurate. So I reveled at the chance of seeing a version that actually managed to do both.
Yes.
Really psyched for it.
Yeah, and it's just a beautiful looking show as well because of the set pieces, the costuming, the editing, how it was totally like brought to the screen. It's very much what I'm imagining is like a faithful reconstruction of the novel. So let's get into the plot a bit. So this is the premise of Shogun. So Shogun is follows. Shogun follows the collision of two ambitious men from different worlds. John Blackthorne, a risk-taking English sailor who ends up shipwrecked in Japan, a land whose unfamiliar culture will ultimately redefine him. Lord Toranaga, a shrewd and powerful daimyo at odds with his own dangerous political rivals, and Lady Mariko, a woman with invaluable skills but dishonorable family ties, who must prove her value and allegiance. So that's they're like the three main characters and story that you follow throughout, the story of Shogun. So of course we have Sanada, as you know, he's just fantastic. He plays Lord Yushi Toranaga, and like you say, playing Blackthorn, I believe you have it is Cosmo Jarvis, who plays John Blackthorn, who I thought was a really interesting. Oh, that's the wrong one. Many characters that you just totally, that's the one thing about this. This is why I do believe it is like Game of Thrones, because there is that many characters, and you've got to really pay attention of all the ins and outs that's happening in the show. And then you have that's Mariko, and she's played by Anna Sawai, who also
she's my favorite of the entire series.
100% agree. I loved her in this more than I did another show that me and Anubis did a review on with DJ Neko, which was a Monarch Legacy of Monsters, which was the spin-off television series from obviously the Monsterverse, the Godzilla the American legendary franchise. So Thrash, would you like to start off and talk a little bit about the plot and things?
Certainly. Well, the setting is actually really, really interesting. It's actually an amazing time in Western civilization because it's literally the first stages of the colonial period, which I know was not something they should be proud of. But the big thing is you have the European powers doing global exploration in their infancy, and they're doing it for no other reason than to get fabulously rich. The early participants, of course, are the Spanish and the Portuguese, who kind of now have a leg up. But other powers, principally the English, are really, really trying to get into the game. This is right around the time the first Roanoke colony gets started and that type of thing. And John Blackthorne, even though I love the way Cosmo plays him. He kind of sounds like Richard Burton. Is this the Japan? I just love the over the top.
The Japans.
The Japans. I love the over the top melodramatic way he plays it. It just fits so perfectly. But he basically is a pirate.
Yeah.
And what he's been trying to do is
I'm not a pirate.
But he is a pirate. He says he's not, but he basically is. He's trying to, with stolen charts, trace the Portuguese back to Japan so he could raid their shipping and get all the precious metals that are heading back to Europe. Only he'll bring them to London as opposed to.
So there is John Blackthorne for anybody that. So because I did. So I'll just to recap because I did get the. So this is the Lord. This is Lord Sanada. Yeah, and then there's Lady Mariko, and then you have the main, like, one we follow, or well, really we follow them all, but they've all got unique story arcs. But for me, like you say, I'm with Anubis on this one, that Mariko's story arc is the one that I was the most interested in throughout the arc of the story. And
Definitely.
what I like about this, like you say, you have the Portuguese and the Spanish that they've basically monopolized the trade with Japan. And then you have, that's the first part of this story. And obviously now you have this John Blackthorne, who is like, he's English, and he's like, he could be a threat to them and their operation basically in Japan. And then on the other side of it, you have this political back and forth with all the regents, because their basically emperor has died, and his basically heir is too young to take control and the leadership, so it is left to like this council who are now battling back and forth for power, and they want to get rid of the Lord so they can take control. And there's different characters in this that are all unique and different. So Lord Taranaka, who we saw previously, so we're seeing him at the beginning. So there's Lord Taranaka, and then this, I believe, is his political rival. Let's hope I get the right picture up this time. I'll probably screw it up, but his political rival is Shun. I can't even pronounce it.
It's a tough pronounce. It's a tough.
Let me see. It's Kashigi.
It's Show something. Show.
Oh wait, no wait. Where I just saw it.
So it.
Oh no, it's Ishido Kazunari, I think. Played by Hiro.
Yeah, and he is his political rival, and obviously he's trying to out him out and take basically control of the whole of the region, so he can basically have the power. So that's the other element of this. But then on top of that, you've got all the other mini subplots that all build together, that build, all the different characterizations of the characters that you either love or hate, similar to Game of Thrones, which is why I think a lot of people fell in love with this show, because on top of Game of Thrones being all about swords and White Walkers and dragons, I think it was the love of the characters and the political back and forth and the different dynamics and relationships that drove the show more than the special effects and the dragons and the White Walkers. And with this, has a very similar feel and tone to that side of Game of Thrones, with the back and forth with the characters and the different storytelling.
And that was one of the amazing things about the Japanese feudal period. It's like, I know there was plenty of intrigue and infighting in Europe at this time. But when you look at the actual Japanese feudal period, it's amazing. You had each fiefdom was fighting each other, and alliances changed routinely. And it just when you try to actually follow it, it's just like, oh my God, I'm surprised anyone survived. You really had to be a master strategist. I mean, Machiavelli would have been like, I can't deal with this.
It's very cutthroat.
And that's one of the things I like most, and I'm sure we'll get into the differences between the two down the road. One thing I want to open up with, though, is the most amazing thing about Toranaga, and I love Toshiro Mifune's portrayal of Toranaga in the original series. But the thing about Toranaga is he's not a nice guy. He's a ruthless politician who is going to do whatever it takes to have things play out to his advantage, which is no worse than anyone else. That's all anyone's doing. But in the original one, it's like, well, they're all pretty ruthless, but this is the good guy. This guy over here is the bad guy. But this guy over here, our guy, is the good guy. No, it just happened to be the one that Blackthorn fell in with.
Yes. And I
it's very
generally,
important to know that.
yeah, I generally think throughout the show, I didn't know which way it was going to swing. Because, like I say, I'm like you, I've never read the books. I don't know anything about the books. But like it's just one book, sorry, isn't it? It's just one book.
Well, this is based on one book. What did Clavel call it? There's a name for this series Clavel wrote, and he's obsessed with Japanese culture. And it starts, I think there's actually one which predates Shogun, but there's actually about a half a dozen books. And the last one actually takes place, well, there's King Rat, which actually takes place during World War II. It's a prison camp story. They made an amazing movie about that one, too. That one's great. There may have been one after that. He may have made one about the post-war era. But again, it's sort of a collection of different periods of Japanese history.
Yeah. Well, Lord Toranaga, when I were first introduced to him, all you know is he's having this political battle. He has his own family. He has this new, lady who's about to give birth to a new son. He has his other son. And at first you have kind of a bit of sympathy because he's basically being, cast out from by his political power. And you think like he is innocent. You think that he basically has, he's getting cast out. But then I found by series end, you do see how ruthless he actually is. And I do think they did do a really good job of hiding that side of him till the very end of the show. And like, obviously, like, yes, he's not one of them that's going to just grab an army and just invade or attack and blow shit up. He's somebody that uses his intelligence. He's a smart mastermind strategist. Yep. And he uses like fear or paranoia or planning and planting seeds in other individuals' heads and making them do all of the work for him without even lifting up a sword. Which
he's
I think
very forward thinking. He's already plotted out. Like every time you think that you'd watch this series and you sit there and go, I don't know how he's going to get out of this. And then all of a sudden, the next episode, you figured out that he's already done this, and this. Like it's like moving your chess pieces around to figure out how you're going to get out of this. And he's already done it. It's like really ridiculous how smart he was.
Yeah. So, like you say, we're introduced to John Blackthorn, whose ship's been wrecked, and his story. He's now shipwrecked in the Japans, as he likes to call them, and now he's having like a back and forth struggle with the Portuguese and the Spanish, who basically he has an interpreter who's basically, when he's speaking, he's not seeing what he's actually saying to the Japanese person who's in front of him, and he knows he's being sabotaged to look like this barbarian, cruel, he's being he's being basically set up. So that's his side. And then, like I say, you have the political side with him. And then all of a sudden, obviously, after some back and forth, he suddenly presented in front of he's then placed in prison with these men who have survived this really harsh time in this shipwreck. And the very first episode shows you like the tone of the show. And one of my favorite scenes and the most disturbing scene is where you see one of his crewmen get boiled alive in quite a dark and really painful way to die, which I thought was a fantastic scene, and really set up the show and the tone of the show for the rest of the series.
Yeah, that scene. It's funny too because they do that to an extent in the first miniseries, but it's not to a boiling point. It's just really, really hot water, and they do it to torture the guy, not to kill him. and he's in and out in only like a few minutes. My understanding is he still didn't survive, but it wasn't an execution. In this, it was an execution, and they take the greatest efforts to make sure you realize just how long and agonizing being boiled alive is. I mean, we actually watch the sun setting as the man is dying, and it really gives a sense of holy. I mean, and it serves 2 points. One, it shows just how ruthless a society Blackstone has got into, but he really realizes I got to watch my step. These people are not messing around. Things here are going to get real, and he does. He goes from this sort of swaggering, blundering Westerner. No other way of putting it. That's what he is. And then all of a sudden he's like, "Okay, I'll play your game. We'll do it your way." Okay. I mean, he still maintains he's still, let's face facts, he's still a badass. But he's much more cautious after that. Much more cautious after that.
Yeah, definitely. And he's obviously, when that's going on, he's actually being held by Kishi Yabuchi, I believe. Kashiji Yabuchi, who was like, he's a character that I believe throughout the show, he's like just a weasel of a character. He's like, he'll align himself with anyone that will benefit himself. So obviously he captures this ship, and it's under, obviously it's his village. He captures the ship that's shipwrecked, and he's boiled him, and he takes great pleasure in boiling him because he likes to hear the people die. And he's got this ship and all the cannons and all of its cargo. And this is when I believe Lord Toranaga, he hears about it, and he basically sends people to basically get Blackthorn to bring him to him, and he basically takes control of the entire village, which really annoys the Weasel character. And obviously that's when I think they bring in Lady Mariko to do the translation for him.
Who and it's funny because in the original, it's they somehow work it in that in addition to Portuguese, she also learned English. Never really adequately explaining how. In this, it's established that when John is talking to her, he's speaking to her in Portuguese because he has learned Portuguese, which makes far more sense. I can understand why she would learn Portuguese because they're basically controlling the import-export business. There'd be no call for her to learn the barbarian English.
Yeah.
At this stage. So I thought they handled that very, very well.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And she's an amazing character. She really has she has presence. She has poise. She is not simply a pawn, even though most of the men are, even the warriors. They're just, doing their bit. She also has her own agenda, but she really she's got stuff going on, and you can tell she is not a pawn.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. So, and obviously, like I say, through the spies, Toranaga has taken the ship. Is it called the Erasmus?
Erasmus, yes.
Erasmus, and then he brings Blackthorn to Osaka, and he basically interrogates him and like finds out some information on him, and then has Mariko be the translator. And I like how, and at the sea, because you see, it's such a strong, complicated plot. While all that's going on, like I say, you've got Blackthorn's plot, Lady Mariko's plot, and then Toranaga's plot is like, because you've got the regent, and he's basically about to be impeached by the regents. So that goes all that stuff happens, and then obviously this is when Toranaga he's starting to plot basically how he's going to get out of this mess. and he's going to use John Blackthorne in somehow, because he sees him as an asset. Somehow he sees him some sort of asset to get out of this impeachment and to take on the other regents. There's 5 regents. And then Lady Mariko has her own secret of being the daughter of, I'm assuming, a disgraced samurai or lord. So she's now trying to like get out of, you know, this past and this reputation that's like a curse on our family like lineage. And so all that's going on. And then John Blackthorne, in the beginning, he starts the plot, basically how he can use the Japans to his advantage to get one over the Portuguese and obviously the Spanish. But if all in all, the whole show is about people manipulating each other and trying to gain advantage and get, you know, use whatever resources they have for their own gain. And John Blackthorne's doing that in his own way, because he's going to use, you know, Lord Nasaka to gain their up advantage on the Spanish and the port, and also to kind of put a stop to their operation. And then at the same time, you've got the Lord who's going to use John Blackthorne, who he thinks is a pirate, who keeps getting called a pirate, but actually just a, you know, he's just a sailor. He's just a, you know, navigator, as you will. And he wants to use him to learn how to use these cannons, these weapons of, you know, against, you know, the incoming threat. So what's your whole take as well, Anubis, like on the whole plot? Because it is quite complicated to talk about it all.
Yeah. It's very interesting because you almost have like 3 different factions running here. You've got the samurai with Toranaga and the rest of them. Then you've got the Portuguese with Blackthorne, and again, of course, you have the Catholic Christians that they're at war with, basically. So it's kind of funny because Blackthorne is like, his main concern is he wants to get rid of these, you know, Catholic false Christian people, as he would call it. So he tries to convince, obviously, Toranaga and them that, you know, these people are going to try to overtake you. They're going to just wipe you out, and they're just deceiving you at this point. But of course, they have this close tie-in with the Japanese at this moment because they're kind of teaching them about the Christianity, and some of them are becoming Christian, like Mariko and them, and others are not. But it's a really tug of war between the 3 of these factions, even though Blackthorne is kind of by himself right now as a Portuguese representative. But yeah, you said it earlier, like there's a lot of deceit going on. There's, you know, even within the Japanese you know, hierarchy, you've got them just constantly like, you know, betraying one another to get up an edge over here and there, especially because what the fuck is that dude's name? I keep forgetting. Kazazunari, he's the one that's like really pushing
So
for.
is it him?
Yeah, no, that's
He's the
yeah,
weasel.
He's the one that kind of jumps around back and forth. He just takes whoever's going to let him live. This is the dude right here. This is this guy. He's the one that's like driving force to get Toranaga out of there. And then of course you have the Chiba Nokata, played by Fumi Nakita. I think is she like I don't know, she's a consort. Who's the main woman that's like sort of like the empress almost? Like she's the one with the heir. Yeah.
Yes.
No,
she the
not
one?
there.
Oh no, that's his consort.
Okay, that's his consort.
Her husband, what did he did some infraction. He either drew his sword before a shogun, or he crossed the line. They weren't supposed to enter the room.
That's her.
And I'm sorry, I'm jumping the gun here. Continue.
No, you're good, because you're just explaining the girl. Like that's the thing. Like this, the one I'm thinking of is this one here, who was friends with Mariko when they were kids, and
the emperor's consort.
Right. And so she has like this weird dynamic within the hierarchy as well, because obviously
she's like the mother of the new heir to the emperor. So like I mentioned at the beginning, the whole plot is you've got Blackthorne's shipwrecked. He's trying to overthrow the Spanish and the Portuguese who are Christians, and he's a president. Then you have obviously the regions battling for power, but in the middle, obviously at the beginning, why there's like a council is because the emperor's passed, and there's a young heir who's
like 8.
Yeah, and until he gets to the age of 16 or 17, he can't lead the country. So they have this region, but they're all bickering among themselves. And she is the mother. She is the one that gave him an heir, and she's basically the voice behind this character, not that character. Sorry, there's that many fucking characters.
There's a lot of characters in there.
So she is the voice behind him. Basically, she's basically the main plot, schemer behind it all, because she has a grudge against our Lord here, because I believe
one of the things I really like though about this is one, you've got almost like a little bit of The Last Samurai in this, not a lot, because obviously Blackthorn isn't like mastering samurai fighting or anything, which that's something I probably would have tried to do, even though you did attempt. But the other thing is like, and even though I kind of appreciate this, even though some people don't, because we talked about with -1 a little bit, is how much of absolutionists that the Japanese are when it comes to honor and death. So like that's something that Blackthorn really struggles with a lot, because he's like, why are you dying for nothing? Like he's like, he doesn't really understand the concept of Hirikiri and all this other stuff that they do in their traditions. And
it's like their culture, isn't it? And it's like obviously you've got that great scene with the gardener, when the gardener, they kind of misinterpret of what he's trying to say. And they basically say is, don't move the pheasant or you'll die. And because it's rotten, it's stinking the place up, and there's complaints from the other houses around the area. The gardener finally says, right, enough's enough, I'll get rid of the pheasant, but because I've dishonored my lord, which is him, I have to die. So out of respect to the Lord's wishes, saying you must die if you get rid of the pheasant, he kills himself. Which is like, back in the day, it was all about honor and trust and, respect and, values, and it's their culture there. And they took it, like you say, to the death. They took it to the death with them. If they promise they won't break a promise, and they said, I will give you my life if I break your promise or anything, that they literally would commit suicide, is a way of showing respect. And it's also, I guess, in their way, because they broke an oath or broke a promise by committing suicide, ending their own, it's them regaining their honor in some way, shape or form.
And I'm so glad. I'm so glad you mentioned The Last Samurai, by the way, because this is sort of a juxtaposition. The Last Samurai, and that's something about The Last Samurai I never fully understood. In that first battle, he's taking down the Japanese warriors left and right, even gets a couple of them with his standard. Yet when he fights one single on later on, he gets the snot kicked out of him. So that never really added up to me. But in any event, he becomes a sort of integral, indispensable part in the, I'm going to butcher the Tokugawa uprising. And it's that sort of what they've been calling lately, the Western savior, where some white guy shows up and just sort of puts everything in place for the locals. This isn't like that.
Right. And that's what I like about it.
Exactly. Yep. Blackthorn is a pawn. Toranaga never even really changes his plan. He adds a wrinkle or two. But Blackthorn isn't indispensable, to the point where one time he says, well, we'll give you everything you want, but you have to leave Blackthorn behind to be executed. He goes, oh, okay. And Blackthorn, remember, he steals a ship and escapes.
Yeah, that was a great moment. Yeah,
it's an amazing moment. But he's like, you were really going to let me die, weren't you?
Yep. But that's funny, because that moment, too, Toranaga was like very impressed that he was able to finagle his way out of that.
That's the great thing about the character of Lord Toranaga. Like, he doesn't really plot a plan. He allows everyone to play their part, like on a chessboard. And when he sees an opportunity to, strike and do checkmate, he takes it. So like I was saying before, he's like a master strategist. If he hears a rumor or with him having his spies all over, when the spies report back, he'll hear what they're saying, and then he'll suddenly be like, right, and just let it play out, because if it plays out, it's going to play out in my favor, and stuff like that, which I always thought was a great, it makes him a great, like, I wouldn't even, he's not a hero, and he's not like a likable character either. He's more
In
like,
fact, all of them are kind of like that. I don't think there's one in there that's really like generally perfect. Like, so like even look at Mariko's husband Bentaro, like he is, he's got damage, but he's like a hell of a samurai, but like he's got a lot of like issues with him as well, even in how he treats Mariko, which again, this is sort of their tradition. The women are kind of just there to do, the husband's bidding, but Blackthorn is kind of like frustrated by that because that's not how they are in the West. So but all of them have their baggage, and it's like very interesting that none of them really come out looking like spot free clean, which is kind of nice because that means they all have their own faults,
I really liked how they played. Forgive me if I butcher Mariko's husband's name wrong. Butano.
Bentaro.
Sorry. I like how they played him in this, because in the original, he's a sort of, and that was the thing about how we envisioned Japanese culture back in the day. Either they were these very in-tuned, cerebral meditationists, or they were just these like homicidal maniacs with a sword going chop, 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 chop. And in fairness, we got that from Kurosawa films. That's how most people in Kurosawa films are. They're either very heady or very choppy.
Yeah, the Seven Samurai.
But Brutano in the original, he has this like resting bitch face the whole time, and he's basically just a homicidal maniac. In this, he's not a good guy by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, we see him actually as something of a monster, but he's a three-dimensional character.
Yes.
And he actually has qualities of some kind. And that's another thing that I can't stress this enough about this version, is that, I mean, the original version, it was almost like an I, Claudius handling of Japanese culture, where it was like a stage set piece. In this, they're all three-dimensional characters, and it's seen particularly in Moriko's husband.
Yeah, because you can see each one of them, like you said. For most of this film, Bentaro is kind of this asshole, but then like you find moments where it's like, oh, you can kind of empathize and sympathize with this character.
I felt like, I don't know. Sorry for interrupting. I felt as well as there's that scene where he finally goes, I'm going to give what I believe she wants, which is to end her life because she's miserable, and he does that tea ritual, and I kind of had a bit of sympathy for him during that time. I felt like, but like you say, he is an badass samurai, and I felt, is he going through some sort of, PTSD, which wouldn't have been diagnosed back then, and is it a mixture of the pressures of, having to be this strong samurai warrior figure who's following all of the traditions, and then trying to also be a husband and all of this, but especially to a woman that doesn't love you back deep down.
But how great was that scene when he and Blackthorn were drunk on sake, and then he used the bow and arrow, and like I don't think even Blackthorn knew how good his aim was, even being drunk off his ass.
My favorite part about that scene is, and that's another bit is, well, of course, it's Japanese production, so Japanese culture would be reflected therein. But long story short, years ago, I had a friend who became really fascinated by Japanese culture, and one night invited his friends over for a sake service. And I remember I got glared at because I reached over and I grabbed the bottle and I helped myself, and they were like, you never, ever, 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 ever pour your own. It's like barbaric. And if you watch really closely, Blackthorn reaches over and he grabs the bottle and he goes to pour it himself. And if you look closely, the two women are just kind of like, ew. It's like it was considered an ungodly breach of etiquette. But the interesting thing is her husband goes, well, okay, if you're going to do that, I'm going to do that. And they even drink with the wrong cups. And it's this great sort of moment between the two of them. Even greater still, if you realize what the two of them are doing, it's almost like when in Rome, do as the Romans do.
Yeah.
It's like it's a complete and total departure from their own culture. But he's like, screw it, I'm not going to let him get one up on me. And
Yep.
I thought the whole thing was weird. And then, of course, he does the thing with the bow and arrow. And I think we all know who won that round.
Yes. What we'll do is, instead of just talking deeper and deeper into the plot, because we'll be here for 9 hours.
Yeah.
Easy.
But
Easy.
what I'll do is I'll just show a character poster and we'll talk about their, part of the plot, and just talk about the film that way. So we'll start from the top poster. Lord, Toranaga. So your basic thoughts on his story throughout the series.
For me, Sanada's great portrayal. I love his character. I love him as an actor. He's now one of my favorites, within the last 5 years.
Yeah.
One thing we keep talking about is his mind as a strategist in military combat. And there's a scene later in the film where, again, you think that he has like no out, like he's done. Like he's even saying, I'm going to step down. I'm going to, probably be killed or whatever. And again, he's always forward thinking. So one of his best friend ends up committing Hirikiri. And
that was one of my most, that actually got me quite teary-eyed because I love that character. So that just
Toranaga was gutted by that. He was hurt by that, but he had a purpose. He knew what that would do for the end game.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the thing. Like that's when Thrash and Kevin, when you talk about how Toranaga is kind of like a ruthless guy, he'll let that happen because he knows, despite the pain that he's going to feel that his best friend is gone, that in the long run, that's going to get him where he wants to be.
Mm-hmm. What's your thoughts on his character throughout the story arc?
Well,
Thrash.
Again, he is the man of his time. He is the high watermark of Japanese culture. He's a ruthless person, but it's a ruthless game they're playing, the Game of Thrones, shall we say. It's like the old expression, when you live amongst wolves, you should howl. And I think he's an amazing strategist. Right down to the fact, even his son, who's a loose cannon, pun intended, even he turns that to his advantage. And not to say that he didn't mourn the loss of his son, but even that act gave him an edge in the conflict he had with his rivals. And right down to the fact that the old expression, keep your friends close and your enemies closer.
Yeah.
He uses his friends outstandingly, but he even manages to use his enemies.
Mm-hmm.
Like he knows what I bet you do this, so I'm going to let you do that, and someone will be to my advantage. The scene where, and I forget the guy. Actually, no, I'm going to hold this one because I think we're going to be talking about him in a few minutes. There's one particular character who thinks he's coming out ahead and does not, and it's all thanks to Toranaga's, again, Machiavellian machinations.
Right.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like with just real quick, Toranaga's son, as you said, Thrash, like even when the enemies are being used as pawns unknowingly or unwillingly, the reality is his son dies by his own hand. Like he does a stupid thing and slips. So, but because the main enemy is there present, he's going to be seen as the guy that resulted in that death of that son. So again, it's like, it's not even purposeful. Like that, the enemy didn't even realize that this was going to happen.
Well, it was his brother, wasn't it?
He knows that's going to set the tone for the rest of what's going to happen with Toranaga. He's like, fuck.
Yeah.
This guy's dead.
And the mourning period buys him some time.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Which is what he really needed in that case. To the point where you almost wonder, did he think son was going to do something stupid? But then, nah, too far.
And it's like, yeah,
it's hard to think, man, because like you said, the son was so unpredictable that like he's a loose cannon. I can't control him, so we'll see what happens.
I have to lie. I cannot lie. Like when that happened and he slipped, and I kind of giggled. I shouldn't, but I did. I was like, "Oh well, this is just perfect." Of course, that would happen to the son.
Yeah,
and it didn't. In a way, it didn't surprise us.
No,
Because obviously another plot point in this is like when he does get away from Osaka. He called in the Lord. He calls for his brother or his brother-in-law to join in the line. Who turns on him as well.
Mhm.
And so, in a heat of rage, he thinks the son's like, "Well, I'll get rid of the brother-in-law.
uncle.
And I'll just kill me uncle for the sake of it," and plots this kind of attack, and then he ends up slipping, like you say, and ends up. He doesn't even die in battle. It's like it's just
In a koi pond. He slipped in
yeah,
a koi
it's like
pond.
the worst way he can like go out.
Mhm.
A koi pond of all
Mhm.
things, the most tranquil,
Yeah.
So, what do I think of John Blackthorne's story arc?
He was okay. He's definitely interesting. There's points where I wish he could have been a little stronger in certain circumstances, but at the same time, I like as Trash pointed out about the Last Samurai. You didn't want him to be this guy that's all of a sudden could speak the language perfectly, or he can fight like them better than them. Like we didn't need that. Like this is good. Just didn't take his character too far out of range. Like he can just be the best at what he was.
Yeah, Thrash.
well, like I said earlier, I love the way he played him. I love the whole Richard Burton-esque melodramatic character. That I thought that was great, and I really felt as though he felt to me like an authentic 1600 British sailor. He really gave that feeling. And again, he is your fish out of water character, typical fish out of water. We're putting ourselves in his place. He's the character that we identify with, and I thought he did a very nice job. I couldn't agree with you more. I wish he had more to do.
Yeah.
I wish there would I mean, other than the biggest thing he did was pull Toranaga out of that fissure.
Yep.
That's really and he saves Rodriguez at one point too, but that doesn't really go anywhere either. I wish he had really just done like one really like cool thing. But he was pretty badass. I mean, he escaped the harbor on his own. He saves the trader dude for no other reason than he feels that's what you're supposed to do with people. One thing that really bothered me though is the ending of his is so ambiguous. They have that little flash forward where he's back in
I
London
didn't get
30
that.
years later.
I did not get that. That's
Exactly.
one thing. It just did not feel like it fit in. Like where he's an old man on his dying bed, and it's like his deathbed, and he's like reminiscing about his past.
And
it
his
just
grandson,
didn't. It just
Do
didn't.
you think that's because they thought maybe the series wouldn't go for another season? Do you think maybe they were just trying to wrap it up in case?
Honestly, I think it was meant as a fantasy.
Mhm.
Like he's fantasizing about years from now when I'm back home, my grandkids will think I'm a hero, my people will think I'm a hero, and in reality, I didn't really do anything because
Yeah.
the kids are like, "Why is the sword chipped?" Oh, because he fought off 200 Japanese. No, the sword is chipped because he dropped it.
Mhm.
So
Like,
I think he's already thinking of his tall tales, but
like
it doesn't fit at all.
my opinion of his story, because he started off just as ruthless as Toranaga and the Portuguese and the Christians. He was trying to, like, he even said he said at the end, basically, you know, I was using you because I wanted to use you. I was using you to get what I wanted. And I think after all he had the experience, it just didn't matter anymore. And I did like that element how he kind of not that he redeemed himself, he kind of found a new purpose, which was like just to be.
Well, I think he began to understand which
in their
is like
culture.
Tom Cruise's character. He understood the culture a little bit. Like he didn't agree with it all, but he understood part of it. And so it's like Mariko was a big influence on him, kind of changing his persona and how he felt about them. And at least part of them. Like he doesn't like every one of them, but he had mad respect for Toranaga, but Toranaga was always one step ahead of him. You know, that's why when he says, I was just using it, Toranaga was like, yeah, I knew that. You know, I'm not dumb.
The lovely lady Mariko. The best character.
Definitely my favorite character.
Definitely best character.
The
best
biggest
story arc.
I like the one scene where she's trying to leave because she's got to get back towards the end, and she's like fighting with the spear.
She's there. She did that to prove a point, because you've got all of the regents' families, all of the course hosts and all that stuck in the Osaka castle, and they're saying, well, they're not hostages, they can leave at any time, but then they're told you can't leave without a permit. And she did that to prove a point. Which it kind of forced his hand to go, we need to let her go because the city will revolt.
Now, I have one question for both of you, and I pretty much know what the answer is, but like I've only watched it one time through. And when it happened, I'm like, okay, I think this happened, but I'm not 100% sure. So is she the one that slept with Blackthorn the evening that it was dark?
Oh, not the evening that it was dark.
No.
Okay. Later on, they did it.
Yeah, she has an affair with him, but no. It was a I forget what their word for it, but it was a professional.
It's when Toranaga says, I want her to do a pillow with a female, pillowing with a female, and you've got this character who I think is the one that I think that Toranaga wanted Blackthorn to sleep with, which is this lady.
Yeah, she was the concubine initially.
Yeah, so she is like his. Obviously, she's now been given to Blackthorn by Toranaga, and during that one night, she basically gets ordered to sleep with Blackthorn, but then it's Mariko who goes and sleeps with him.
So you think it is her that night?
It's the first night.
Does you think Mariko is there? Because that's what I thought, but because there was this weird thing afterwards where I think either he's fantasizing that it was her and it was actually the other like escort, or it was her and she didn't say nothing about it. And I think because the interesting thing about this moment, she thinks that her husband is gone. Like he was standing on that dock trying to fight all these guys off.
No, I do think it is Mariko, because the next day they're sitting at the koi pond just having cups of having breakfast or whatever, and the other ones look on this I forgot her name, but this character, when they're talking about having a good night's sleep and all that, and there's like this underlying kind of hints of something's happened. She's looking very confused, and she's got like a smirk on her face, Mariko. So it was definitely her who we got with, because when the husband shows up alive, she's in complete shock.
Yeah, good point.
Good point. So, and I don't know if she felt he was still alive, if she would have slept with him.
No, I think she was very traditional in that respect.
I think if she didn't realize he was still alive, I don't think she would have given to her urges as well. But because she basically
later on, I think she just kind of had enough, because after she told her husband, like, I just want to die, I'm not in love with you. Like, I think she, like I said, they all had like this weird growth about them, and sometimes they were bad and good people. But like, I think she
knew she was going to die.
Yeah,
Blackthorn had this crazy idea that they were going to survive and get out of it. She's kind of like, no, this is kind of how things were going to play out.
And it was all revealed that basically she had made an agreement with the Christians to sink that ship to get Blackthorn East freed. And that was the bargain, because they didn't want him to have a ship where he could go against their ship, and also with the silk trade and all that. So in his mind, he thinks she's died in vain, but it was part of her
I
plot.
will tell you this series is saved by the thought that she dies, spoiler alert, she dies later in the series. If she dies anytime earlier, I probably would have stopped watching, because it's happened to me before where I get attached to characters in series, and if they die too early, then I kind of check out because like I really enjoy those characters, and she's one of the best.
Yeah. Well, what
So I'm glad they kind of did it much later, which is you can kind of accept that. But
well, her story arc for me is she's the daughter of a disgraced lord who, you know, for whatever reason, and then you see the back and forth of her. Then she she's kind of lost her own way, her own purpose, and then her only purpose is to save Lord Toranaga, and then at the end, she also, I think, she doesn't want to live her life anymore. She wants freedom, but she doesn't want it by the hand of her husband. If you remember, he was let's kill each other together, and she said you just don't get it and all this stuff. So her dying the way she died, knowing she was going to die by sacrificing, that was her way of taking control of her own life, also fulfilling her duty to Toranaga.
Toranaga saw. He saw that coming.
He knew she would fulfill. It was a way for her to fulfill her obligations to him. It was a way of regaining her honor for her family, and it was a way of letting her die in her own way, shape, and in her own terms. So she fulfilled her purpose of what she wanted for herself, for her family heritage, and of course for Toranaga. That's how I took her story arc, which it was sad to see her go though. But the next character, Mr. Weasel, what's your thoughts on him, Anubis?
Yeah, he was kind of a fun character. I mean, despite all the betrayal and the ridiculousness of side switching and everything else, he was a very interesting character. He was fun to watch because he was kind of funny. But yeah, he's one of those guys that as you're watching any kind of series or characters, like it kind of drives you insane because you just know he's not trustworthy whatsoever. And it's like when he finally gets it, he gets it, and I'm like, justice, yeah. Because I think that was part of the thing. It's so funny because he was like a lord of his own little town, right? If I recall, So I mean, he's one of those guys that it was always about saving his own skin. Like even on his death, it's like he understood, like, okay, I'm gonna die with honor or whatever, but he was trying to escape that the entire time. He just did not want to do that. No matter who it came from, you know what I mean?
He would have sold his own child to survive. He was just he had no honor really. He was just, and I think that was the whole point. Like when I first saw his character, because like I say, I haven't read the books, and I can't even remember the original because obviously it came out in 1980. I wasn't born till 1983, so I wouldn't have noticed this. So some of these characters are probably from the book and have been brought in, where some of them in the original miniseries might have not have had some of these characters in. So for me, I was expecting his character, because of how Weasley was in the beginning, he would have had some sort of redeeming arc. I thought that's what they were going to do. And in some ways, he did. It was leading down that path, but in the end, he just gave in to his true nature. And it's due to him that we lost Marikyo. You know, it's due to him. So when I seen his death, spoiler, he dies as well. It's like Game of Thrones people. There's a lot of people die in this. But when he died,
he was very easy manipulated by anybody. That's his big problem. That's why when the bomb thing happened, he's like, "What the fuck did I do?"
So with him, when he died, I wasn't surprised, and I didn't really have much feelings when he died. The only thing I loved, it was a way they used how when he was dying and he looked and he basically was asking, "Can I have one last wish before I die?" tell me your plans, the Lord, Toranaga. And he tells him everything, like what happened. He's like, I planted the seeds, I didn't do anything. They did it all for me. That's proper strategy. And then he told them the plans of the future of what he wanted to build after it all goes down. And it was just so well done. And it just made complete amazing sense. So
but
for
you
that,
knew at that moment he was going to die, because there's no way that Toranaga could have left him alive. You'd not be able to trust him with any of that.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the only reason he told him, because he knew as soon as he had told him, he would have to. He would have either had to do what he did, or he would have just chopped his head off.
Yep.
So the next character is our rival. I personally thought, I'll just do my little bit of news too. I personally thought, I understood plot-wise, this character, he could have been a bigger villain, or they could have made him a bigger threat than he was. For me, even though he was a huge threat in terms of on the political side, Toranaga, for me, came across as a much dangerous figure than him, and he was meant to be the main antagonist until obviously this lady rocked up. And but I think she came into it far too late. Plot. I think if they had him, showcased him, but it might, because obviously I don't know if this is accurate to the book, but if they had showed her right at the beginning pulling the strings and led up to like a big scene with her and say Lady Mariko, it would have been fantastic. It would have been proper, like building up, and it would probably have had me interested more. But unfortunately, it didn't go that way. So for me, even though he is like meant to be the main antagonist, I personally feel he didn't deliver in the way I was expecting him to do. But at the same time, there's that many characters you need to follow. There's only so much of the plot for each episode you can showcase on screen.
Well, the funny thing, he is the main villain in a sense, but as you said, like the problem is when you have like the woman, the Empress or whatever, who is kind of pulling the strings from behind the scenes, and so it's like his reach is only so much. So like we talked about with Mariko trying to fight her way out of the castle, it's like, everybody can go if they please, but then we're going to keep him in. But then when push came to shove, he still had to let her go, because otherwise no one's going to trust him, because he's trying to convince this entire council that his way is the right way. And so it is tough, and it's tough with the lady that you brought up, because I personally liked her and Mariko's like interaction towards the end, where she's trying to leave and it's like they're friends, but they're not, because like there's some like wall there that Mariko's putting up, and it's like I kind of like that cattiness that they had.
Yeah,
it's almost like, because she mentioned something about like a poem, which I thought was great.
Yeah,
that was a nice touch. And I was curious, Thrash, because I want to get before we finish up. I know you got some more to talk about, but how did you feel about the death of the characters in this compared to the original? Because you're more familiar with the original work.
From the original miniseries.
Yes. Yep.
That's actually one of the things I liked more about this than the other. Long story short, it's really, even Mariko isn't that really big of a character in the original. She is a big character, but she plays it in this sort of very demure Japanese female character cliche. It's really a buddy film between Blackthorn and Toranaga. So while other characters die, it's not particularly, it doesn't make as big of a splash.
Yeah, it doesn't have as big as of an impact.
Exactly, because it's not an ensemble. It's really about those two.
Yeah. So basically, the miniseries is like you say, it's a back and forth buddy cop film kind of thing. Miniseries, and anything else becomes substitute to just the two main characters. Where in this, each episode is spread out, and the pacing of each episode and the story that they're telling is paced out in such a way that you do get to know each character, and you either bond with them, you either love to hate them, you either love to love them, or you're indifferent about them, but you know they're still integral to the plot that they're trying to portray.
Perfect. Exactly. Exactly. And
That's-
there was nothing wrong with that original because, like I said, Toshiro Mifune was amazing and Richard Chamberlain was amazing. But there's a lot more going on in the story, and I think this adaptation did a really good job. And again, particularly with character deaths. Character deaths were a really big deal in this.
Yeah.
So the next character. Yeah, so what's your opinion, Thrash, on this gentleman?
Well, again, he's not just a bad guy. If we're going to use a Game of Thrones template, he's like kind of your Ramses type. He is not a nice person, particularly in how he treats his wife. I'll leave that to the viewers to understand exactly what I'm talking about, but I think you have a pretty good idea. He's abusive. But again, in the original, he's this really two-dimensional character. Just kind of, there's a scene in the original where when he addresses a group of villagers, and one's a sort of doddering old man, and when he goes to leave, this doddering old man neglects to bow, and he takes his sword and decapitates him. And while that would probably not be unheard of, that's a little far. You know, even at the time I saw that, I go, if you decapitated every person who, let's just say, I thought it was a little far-fetched. In this, I can't say he has redeemable qualities, but he is a full. That scene where the boats flee the harbor, they have to kick away from the docks, and he hasn't made it. They think he's dead, but then he shows up. And they can't go back for him. And he just kind of stands there for a second. And he just gives this sort of expression like, do what you got to do. And then he goes back to, you think he's going to like just meet his death. Spoiler alert, he actually escapes. But that scene, you honest to God feel bad for him. And any drama that can make you feel bad for the characters you hate, you got to say, I don't know if it's a combination of he was a really, really good actor, or just it's a really, really good drama, or both, but you got to give it to him. And again, I couldn't agree with you more. That tea service scene where he basically goes to these great lengths to try to reconcile with Mariko just so they can meet death together. And she goes, I'm all set. I'd rather even meet death without you. And I'm
that's the thing about his character, man. Like, and that's a good point that you made. You know, the thing is, he shows some growth as the series goes on as well, because as you said, he starts kind of trying to reconnect with Mariko, whereas before it was kind of like she was just there just to be his wife, but then he started to really feel it. And I think part of that is because Toranaga forced his wife to be a translator and hang around with the Anjin all the time, whereas that annoyed him. Like, he didn't like that fact that she had to be around this other guy, which he clearly saw there was some connection they had. He knew that. But then that dock scene, like, that's one of my favorite moments, because despite all his assholeness and all this other stuff, he's yelling at Toranaga, like, you know, I forget what he said exactly, but something, my lord, like, I've got you, get away. And there's like this scene between Toranaga and Banaru where there's this understanding of like respect. And so, you know, here he is, he's going to take on this mob of guys, and, you know, you don't see him die. So like, he's clearly holding his own. He's like fighting them and dragging them away. And then when he makes it out, it's like, it's just even better. Like, that's a hell of a samurai, regardless of all his flaws. That dude was a badass, period.
Yeah. For me personally, he's one of them characters that you either love or hate, or you're indifferent with, like I was saying before, because you see him at the beginning and he's a very hard-faced, kind of serious character. Then you think he's a hero, like you see on the dock. He does this, he fights all the other samurai. Then when you see him alive and he kind of becomes like that horrible, you know, abusive husband. And I think it's because he generally has never really shown any emotion towards Mariko. But once he sees she's bonding with another man, it's an inner jealousy thing. And I think it then made him realize, I actually do care about her.
Yeah.
And I've disrespected her for so long.
Long.
I need to show her that I can change. Or
And that's the thing
I
about
do-
Japanese culture back then, is that women were just kind of given to men. Like it wasn't like, oh, we get to woo and fall in love. He was like, yep, you get my daughter, here you go. And so this is kind of like playing off of that, where he's been given this woman
yeah. Mhm.
who he
Well,
kind of takes for granted,
mhm.
and then when he realizes she's much more than what he thought, and of course the jealousy is like, I did have something special, now I'm kind of letting it slip away. So he's trying to make up for it, but it's a little bit too late at this.
Yeah, it's too late.
Yeah.
She's kind of already made her mind up that she doesn't want to be with him. And if you remember the flashback scene after, you see her father die, you see her father who she doesn't want to go to be with this man who he's betrothed that to, but the father's only done that to save her life. But I don't think realizes that at the beginning, and then obviously he must have took her as his wife to save her. But then they had no real chemistry or connection, and it's kind of just been like a forced relationship. And because they didn't have time to properly fully bond or to get to know each other, they're so indifferent to one another. And I think that is why the characters, he became abusive and she kind of drifted apart. And I think because of that, when it comes to the end of his story, or when I think he doesn't. I think he kind of realizes how good he's got with this, with that. But like you say, by the end, it's too late. Just too much drifted apart.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the next character. Now, this character I kind of had sympathy for, because he was in love with somebody who I guess he's never going to truly be able to be with. And he is also a very small character. He is the Weasel character, who knows, nephew, I believe.
Yep.
And he's actually the brains behind the whole operation. He's like his consort or his counsel, where when he's, trying to think of things, he's actually the one that basically makes him think clearly during the situations and the back and forth between the different camps and divides. So what's your opinion of that character? We'll go with Thrash.
Okay, actually, this could sound terrible. He never made much of a splash with me. He was one of the, and every series, every epic, every big, that one character who just is the could have been. And I don't know if because his story arc didn't interest me, or it fizzled out too quickly, or there were just there were so many other things going on. I just didn't find myself having a chance to care. But again, he was the could have been. I did kind of feel bad that his lover was taken away from him. That was the big thing. And you can't help but wonder, because his uncle was such a skeeve, that maybe if he had been in charge, things may have gone better for their side. I'm not sure, but again, he just didn't click with me.
That's why I had a bit of sympathy for him, because he was clearly in love with basically the most beautiful, lady of the whorehouse, basically, in the village. And he fell in love with her. And then in the beginning, you see their plot kind of unfolded, but because there were so many other characters to focus on, his plot basically was left behind. And his plot just kind of disappeared, and he became like just a secondary or third every character. What's your opinion of him, Anubis?
Well, kind of like with Thrash, he wasn't somebody that stood out a lot. I don't know if I really felt bad that, he was losing his love, who was a concubine or an escort or whatever. Mainly because, like, I mean, obviously it probably happened more than you would think during those times, but, she had a job to do, and, like, he put his heart and faith to a woman that would never be truly his.
Mm-hmm.
But in the end, like, the one, I guess, redeeming moment for him would be towards the end, where Uncle Weasel handed over his leadership to him. That was like the best moment for him. So that's really the only time I could say that he had like his moment in the entire series.
Yeah. And that's probably the only time that the weasel, the uncle, redeemed himself, because and I liked how one of the lines he says, "I've always looked at you like a son to me." And I thought that was quite, that was basically him letting him know, I appreciate all you've done for us, because every time they had a scene together, there was always a back and forth with them two arguing. He was trying to make him see sense, or to make him see, this could happen, we need to stick with, Lord Terranara. And he's like, well, no, I'm going to join the other side. And he's like, well, it's a bad idea. And he was trying to make him see the light, but he was so probably afraid for himself that he would go to any side he thought that was the winning side. So I did like that with the back and forth with him and the uncle.
Well, I just want to get back to the weasel guy for 1 second, because I thought of something else that I had to bring up.
The weasel guy.
Precisely, the weasel guy. I just like that better than his actual name, and it stands out better.
Yeah.
It's a nice moniker, though, the weasel. The scene where you know the game is up, and he's gonna be dead as soon as he gets off Blackthorn's boat, and they're going back to the fiefdom to be killed, and he has a sort of psychotic break. Like he's almost giddy. He goes, hey, I know. We can overpower the guards and steal the ship and just sail off into the sunset. And Blackthorn's like, what the bloody hell are you talking about?
He's like, calm down, man.
It reminds me of the scene in Casablanca where Peter Lorre is, Reek, you have to hide me. And it's like, hide you where? They're right there. They can see us talking. But it's like that sort of act of desperation.
Even tells Blackthorn to take him to London, even though he's never been.
The ship.
He's like, let's go back to your land. Let's go back to London. Show me your ways. And
it's funny too, because it's pretty much the only scene in the entire movie, series rather, where you see one of the Japanese characters lose their cool. The Westerners do it all the time, but it's the only time you see one of the Japanese characters lose their cool.
Definitely. So next on the list is the Queen, the heir of the to-be emperor. And the one thing I see with her is she and Lady Mariko's character are like the total counterpart. So she's ready to save her lord, Mariko, and she's willing to do all that. Where she's after the power in the beginning, she wants to. Basically, I think while the son is still grown, she wants to hold the throne, and she wants to basically rule the land in front of him. Because I always remember, we'll go back to that scene you mentioned, Anubis, how she summoned John Blackthorn. So
I'm sorry, my neighbor's building their deck, and it sounded like someone was with my window, but it's not. It's just, but it's like dun 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 smash, dun 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 crash. I'm like, dude.
just open the window and go, hey man, do you not know I'm on YouTube? Keep it down out there.
As long as it doesn't break my deck, I don't care what they do to theirs. So it's like really loud all of a sudden. I'm like, dude. Continue. Sorry, guys.
So I'm talking about, because I'm just saying, like, it's yin and yang with Lady Mariko's story arc and the Queen story arc. For example, she wants to regain her honor. She also kind of wants to take her own life in her own way without basically anything else, and she wants to regain the honor of her family. Where the Queen, she's saying that she's doing everything for her son. Like, all this is to protect my son, but deep down, she secretly wants the power. And if she can puppet master, the other lord, she can have the power. And I love that scene, like that Anubis mentioned, when basically she wants to speak to John Blackthorn, and she brings Lady, Mariko in as the interpreter. And she started initially interpreting for him, but then it becomes a full-on blown conversation between the two of them. So for me, it was just a way to lure her there for them to have a conversation. And I really enjoyed that scene, and you could see the chemistry between the two of them. They're like reminiscing about the past when they were girls, but then they're now looking at the lives now and the path that each one of them's taken. And she's went that way, and they're so indifferent to each other now. Like the Queen comes across very cold and very straight faced, where she's tried to not release her emotions, because I think if she lets her see how she really feels or is, she knows she's probably got one on over her. So
it kind of reminded me of House of Dragon, the Game of Thrones sequel with Rhaenyra and her friend who became the queen.
Yeah.
Not quite as adversarial, but that's sort of what happened to us. There was a time we were like this. Now we're like.
And I think that's the power dynamics, because as kids they don't really look at it. They're just kids, so they're just playing like kids. But as they get older, obviously the one is in rich exposure. She's a princess or whatever, and then of course Mariko is just your average gal. And so as they get older, that power dynamic is now shifted, and this is one reason why Mariko is kind of like, she sees what her friend is doing is what her friend is becoming, so she doesn't like that, and that's why there's this butting of heads. But it's also, you got the guy that's sort of like the puppet for her. He started out as a peasant, and he worked his way up to one of the lords of this council. So it's like, I think between him and the Empress woman, like, if they go in the next season, they'll probably have bigger parts, more meatier parts. I think right now both were kind of like just the bare bones, but try to set it up for everything. So I don't know how it's going to play in the next season, but I hope if they're going to go with those characters, there's going to be more character build there with that.
Definitely. So out of all the characters, this, like, he's me absolute favorite. She was me she was my favorite. He's my second favorite. But I loved her plot, so sympathetic. Now the next two characters are the next two favorites. So there's 4 favorites I've got. Them 2 are me first. Now this next character I absolutely loved, and I'm not gonna lie, I was gutted when this character had gone as well. But this guy, I loved his character. He was loyal, he was noble, he was so respectful, and even he figured out what Lord, Taranaga was doing, and he was willing to even sacrifice himself to create this scene. So anyone that witnesses really truly believe Lord Taranaga had given up. Yep. And the only way to prove that he had was to kill himself. And they had like this back and forth argument in this consort council room. And obviously they're having this back and forth. And I think deep down he knows, for Taranaga to get that one up, I have to do this. And it's I think it's the first time you see Lord Taranaga show any real emotion.
The acting between those two actors during that scene and afterwards just shows you how fucking good they are. Like, I don't know who the actor is that did the friend, but that was one of the most gut-wrenching emotional scenes I had seen in the entire series.
Definitely.
There's one other occasion where you see Toranaga really broken up, even more so than the death of his son, which, again, loose cannon, I think Toranaga was surprised he lasted as long as he did. Not to minimize it, but the only other time you see Toranaga with that level of emotion is when he has to order I'm so sad I can't remember her name, but the consort, when the consort's still alive, husband does the breach of etiquette where he crosses into the next room with his sword drawn, and they're like, nay. He has to order him to kill himself, but the baby as well. Not the baby killed, they have to murder the baby. And Toranaga has to give this order, and it destroys him. But it's necessary, and I don't think he really gets over that. I really don't.
Is that the husband of the woman that ends up becoming Black? Yeah, her.
Blackstone's consort. Yeah,
that's what I thought.
And at the end, he gives her permission to become a nun.
Yeah.
Initially he tried to say no, but she goes, "This is all I want," and he goes, "All right, I give you permission to join the Buddhist nunnery."
Because she agreed to be John Blackthorn's consort for 6 months, and he probably Lord Toranaga's like, well, I know I've done this terrible thing with the husband and the baby, but I need you. You need to do this for me. And I think obviously you don't know how long the time frame is from the first episode to the last, how long it lasted. But obviously I think he allows her to have her wish because she's fulfilled that obligation. And, you know, she could have easily committed suicide or went off the deep end or turned on him. But throughout it all,
at one time she threatens to.
Yeah,
and
she threatens. She stays loyal to him, and I think it's due to, like you say, it's all about in that culture respect, loyalty. Also, I think if you do commit suicide, or I think if you know it, you get besmirched. It's like a dishonor, and you have you get a bad reputation if you do things like that. You only commit suicide if it's like under the behest of a lord or somebody said, right, if you break the rules, you have to do this. Hence, the gardener did it after the pheasant. So, but him, he absolutely was my third favorite character in the whole series, due to the fact of his connection, and also he is the father of Lady Mariko's husband, so it's her stepfather. So, in that. So they have that whole relationship as well. And like I say, the next favorite character is who we're talking about, this lady. Like, and you know, even after the death of her son and her husband, she carries them everywhere she goes in these boxes with their urns attached. And that amazing scene where she's grieving. She's grieved. She's mourning the death of her son and our husband, and I thought was really touching that scene in the boat in the middle of the lake with her and John Blackthorn. And he was basically, I don't think she ever accepted the deaths. It was like her way of accepting that they had gone and that they're at peace, and he was saying they'll be together forever. And when you just to pour the acid and ashes,
I saw like almost a parallel between her character and the character in The Last Samurai, where, you know, of course, Cruz is the one that kills her husband in battle and has to like take care of him. Like, it's so whacked how their philosophies are, because Watanabe's character is like, yeah, you're gonna watch after our little white boy here, and it's like, she's like, what? You know. But then there's like this like kind of respect that happens afterwards. And I think it's Blackthorn's idea that she do this in the boat. Like, I think because he's like saying, you don't have to carry him with you. You can put him in the water and it'll be around you forever. Like, they're going to always be a part of you.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of him sharing his own philosophies about death and stuff with her, when, you know, they're kind of different on how they approach it.
Yeah. And it's like she's finally at peace. She's finally accepted the situation. And because I think Lord Toranaga is now giving her permission to become this nun, she's now going to live the rest of her life basically free of it all. There's no weight over it anymore because she kind of was forced by him. Imagine that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a person's murdered your husband and your son, you still have to serve them. And then you get forced to be the cohort of another person, if a barbarian you don't want anything a part of. Your life basically sucks. It's went down the toilet. But
I mean, we can't minimize just, I mean, Westerners are still kind of considered ill in some circles there, but at this time they were like literally they were considered almost a different species.
Yeah.
And having to serve a Westerner would have been beyond insulting. It would have been like, you know, it's like having an ape in the house and having to serve the ape.
Yeah.
You know, it's really, I mean,
speaking of that, he has another detail of that is when Lady, you know, Mariko goes to the tea room, aka the whorehouse, and she's speaking to the madam, and she's like trying to negotiate a price for this lady who is basically the top lady in the tea, and when she tells that it's not for Lady Toranaga, it's for the barbarian, even the madam has like a look of disgust on her face. She's like, 400. If you want my best, because I think she was going to give it for free because it was Lord Toranaga, but once she finds it for the barbarian, she wants the money. She wants, right? She's like, right.
She had to rent the entire place for the night because she's like, I'm not going to have decent people here while a barbarian's in my house. So you're going to have to rent the entire house for the night. Deal or no deal. And I'm like, yeah, that's we're kind of landing the hook. Now you're seeing like what sort of station Westerners had at this time.
Yeah,
that seems like just remind me so much of like Brotherhood of the Wolf. Mark Dacascos is at the whorehouse with his friend, and most of the escorts are like, I'm not sleeping with that snake man because he's got all these tattoos and stuff. And then the madam's like, yeah, which one of you would entertain the redskin or the Indian? And so like one's like, I'll do it, yeah. But there's this like sense of like fear and disgust when you're dealing with a person that isn't part of your culture, or you're not of the same culture you are. So obviously, as much as I talked about with the Japanese, they're absolutionists. They're very honor's a big thing with them, and just like they're very, I don't want to say OCD, but they're just very strict about their culture. So this is why with the one girl you brought up, her husband and child are killed because of the traditions they have. Like, it's like you would sit there and say, well, why didn't they just bend the rules? They don't do that. Not then. They didn't do that. So it's just, that's just how it is. It's like, it's crazy.
And
so yeah, that madam, as Thrash pointed out, I was like, I'm not going to get any business with this guy here. So you might as well just pay out for the whole damn place, because it's not going to happen.
And like I say, like I think Lady Mariko, her story arc, and obviously Lord Toranaga's story arc are the three that for me were the most interesting, because she had to save Lord Toranaga by being John Blackthorne's cohort. At the same time that she's doing these things she doesn't want to, she's still having to grieve and mourn the loss of her son and her husband. And I guess the whole point that Sean are constantly mentioning and showing, the large box and the small box with the ashes, was their way of showcasing that grieving and mourning and continue to mourn and grieve. So I thought the detailing in that was fantastic for her story arc.
And there's one more piece of the equation which they sort of show in the contemporary one, but is far more hammered home in the original. When Blackthorne finds out that rather than just obey his orders and leave the pheasant alone, the gardener cuts the pheasant down and accepts the death penalty for doing so, he really hits the ceiling. And when the consort, I'm so embarrassed I can't think of the poor lady's name, but when the consort finds out that she messed up, he takes his sword and goes around the house going like this, like, no, you I have to atone. If I disobey you this badly, you have to execute me. I am your consort. I maintain your house, and this is a catastrophic failure. And he finally says to her, he goes, no, this isn't your fault. This is my fault. And they have this really wonderful moment. But it's very sad because she really feels like, as we talk about atonement, if I disobeyed you this badly, it requires an honor killing. You're actually hurting me by not taking me out of the equation.
Yeah. And speaking of a second season, the way they've kind of bonded Blackthorne with her, it wouldn't surprise me if they keep her in as a character, if they build a romantic relationship between her and Blackthorne, because it felt as if they've bonded over the loss of Lady Mariko and her husband and, our child. They've both lost somebody they had cared for. And could that, mutual loss bring them together? Because as we know, the book, this is based off the book, Shogun, the book. So I don't think there was a direct sequel novel was there? So basically anything to come up for season 2 and 3, which they've renewed it for 2 more seasons.
They really have. This is a legit. There are 2 more seasons of Shogun.
Yeah, they're gonna. Wow. Well, I know that the lead actor who plays Lord Teranaga, they want him. That they've been negotiating to have him in the next 2 seasons. All the other cast members and characters, whether they're all going to return or if it's going to be a fresh slate of characters, and it's going to showcase, like you mentioned at the end of the season, how he wants to go back to Osaka Castle and build a new, regime and a new city and make it all peaceful. Whether it's going to be about them, the back and forth political, things going on about, and they'll probably bring in the different religions because he said to the priest, I will allow you to build a church now. I've kept my promise. So it might be a back and forth with religion between traditional Japanese culture and, their basic, how they live their lives, and how maybe Christianity or even presidents are trying to be more influential into their culture. That could bring all this back and forth, and it could create like an inter-city war. That could be a plot that happens, but like I say, Shogun was an amazing show. I loved every aspect. Now this character, the son, I thought he was reckless and it was comical how he died. But he's the only, I've already discussed that character. But in all, how would you summon up the entire show, Thrash?
I thought it was excellent. There's one, and I hope they touch upon it in a sequel. There's only one thing that really I felt they left unturned, and that is we never saw Blackthorn reuniting with his crew. His crew never became anything in the way of an integral part. They're just sort of still there. And I spent the entire movie going, well, what about the crew? What about the crew? What about? In fact, there's this really bizarre scene where he goes to see his crew and he chickens out for whatever reason. He turns around. One crewman comes up. It's a dark, rainy night. Blackthorn's wearing a kimono. He's got his he's groomed, like a Japanese person. So with his back to him, this crew member says, "Blackthorn, is that you?" And I'm like, "How the hell did you recognize Blackthorn like that?" But it's the only interaction he has with his entire crew. So if they do a sequel, I hope they touch upon that. But leaving this unturned stone aside, I thought this series was amazing. It kept me riveted the entire time. There were many twists and turns. I know while sometimes the way the action unfolded was a little on the slower pacing, I never felt like my ADD kicking in, like my mind started to wander. It held my interest, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. One thing that did get a bit rough for me, and that's probably because I suffer from eye strain now, is I would have liked it if maybe a little bit more of it had been in English, if there'd been a little more dialogue with Blackthorn, because like I said, I have no trouble reading subtitles. But again, after about 8 hours, you start to suffer from eye strain. But that's a personal attribution. Love the series.
Real quick, I want to point on that because that's a great point. Is if you've ever seen the 13th Warrior, there's a moment in the beginning where they're speaking in their Nordic language and everything, and then as Banderas learns their language, it translates to English. I kind of wish they would do that here. I mean, I know people get kind of iffy about, you should be able to handle subtitles. It's not about handling subtitles, but I think that you can approach things like that in a good way. Now, granted, the idea is that Blackthorn doesn't understand Japanese very well, so you have to kind of keep that dynamic. But there are ways around it. I mean, I don't know. I think that there are ways you can work that in where it's a little bit easy to digest.
Yeah, one thing I'll say about the Blackthorn character, which I thought was really great and how they did it, you get a lot of films where the film, which might only be a 2-hour film, you'll have a person that gets introduced to a foreign land, see it, or in a fantasy film. and they've got no knowledge, they've got no experience, they've got no expertise in this land. By the end of the film, they can speak the language fluently, they can use a sword, or they can use a battle gun, they can do all the samurai moves, which is totally unrealistic. How they built Blackthorn up with each episode, where you were slowly learning the culture, slowly learning the ways, slowly like taking in words and repeating them, and then slowly could strap sentences together. It was like it was done in real time. Like that's what would have happened. And even that thing with the weasel, when he's like where they're pulling the boat in, when the boat's being sunk and they pull him in, and then the weasel's showing him how to fight with the sword. He hasn't got a clue what he's doing. It's not like he suddenly picked the sword up and could fight him and he knocked him on his horse and said, I can be a samurai now. It wasn't like that. It was done in such a realistic way, which was another integral part of the show, how it kept the realistic feel, look, and authenticity of the times. And that goes back to using the subtitles throughout the majority of the show, because it was there to basically it was like done in real time in real life. That's how it was. And everything that we've talked about, the traditional culture and the ways of life back then, if you did something wrong, you had to commit suicide or you'd be killed, or that was just how it was back then. So that's another positive, is the realism of the show. So what's your overall thought of Shogun, Anubis?
I loved it. I thought it was great. I'm gonna have to go back and actually watch the first limited series. Like I said at the time, I think I watched maybe an episode because they broke it up back then. But it probably won't live up to this, obviously. But I'm very curious about the characters, the same ones that I've seen in this, seeing that, see how much different it was. But this was so amazing, man. Like the acting, top notch, all the way down. Like even for the Weasel character, great acting. Because that's where you want them to make everything believable. Like they want to suck you into the story, and that's what this Shogun is great. Curious what they're going to do going forward. I'm really excited for that. Yeah, it's a 10 out of 10 for me, man. I loved it. I thought it was amazing.
Yeah, for me, I loved it. I thought it was a great show. I thought the pacing worked well. I think the only negative would be I would have liked to have seen maybe just a little bit of a battle between the two sides. Like I know it showed you that great shot when Lord Toranaga, he's talking about the plot to the Weasel at the end and said, "We're going to make it to the battle. We're going to make it to the big field," and you're seeing the armies on either side, but you don't see any fighting. That's my only negative, I would say.
My negative is that the Christians, like, there's a lot of conniving going on behind there with those guys, that group, and so we never kind of see them get some of their asses kicked here and there. It's like they're just playing it safe. So hopefully going forward, we'll see more of like that dynamic with Blackthorn if he returns, maybe confronting them a little bit.
So that's my only negative. And going forward, like you've just mentioned, like I mentioned earlier, during the last monologue with Lord Toranaga, he mentions how he wants to create Endo, which was the city which in the future will become Japan. Because that was Japan back in the day. It had a different name, and then it got bigger and bigger. Sorry, not Japan. It became Tokyo. Sorry.
I know what you meant. I know, but yes.
Yes. So back then, Endo was Tokyo, and then because it got so big, so grand, it became Tokyo. So that's basically what he's pointing out. If you want to make a huge new city with a new regime and all that, and like I mentioned, like you mentioned, Anubis, I think the second season will show you them trying to slowly build this new city. But there's going to be so many political back and forth, and I think religion's going to play a big part in the second season. Like you said, the leaders of the Christians in this, they kind of knew that Lord Toranaga had plotted and that he knew he was going to fight them. And that was the last you've seen of the Christians. So I believe going forward, they could become maybe the main villains in the second season.
There's also, he mentioned it very subtly, but there's a secret base that the Jesuits are using in Macau.
Yes.
And they're using Ronin, which is something that would be very, very disreputable in Japan. They're using Ronin, disgraced leaderless warriors, as guards.
And
And
they never went back to that after the
yes, I
first few
know.
episodes. So there's
That might
loads of
play out.
little, little plot points and loads of little hints of where this could go next. And I always liked that the last episode, the final shot was Lord Teranaga just standing with his back turned, looking out, and then it just goes to black and it comes up Shogun. But like I say, my positives are it was authentic to its time. It was well cast. The acting was fantastic. The costuming, the set designs, the whole everything, the landscapes, the world building was fantastic, and the characters draw you in. So you've already mentioned, Anubis, that you're going to give this 10 out of 10. Out of 10, what would you rank this or rate this Thrash?
I'll give it a 9. It's really tough for me to give it 10. I'll give it a solid 9. And I couldn't agree with you more. I think one solid battle would have been nice.
Yes. Yeah, the closest we got was the cannon scene where the horses and the samurai were blown to bits, which was another reckless move by the dumb son. But anyway, if I'm gonna rate this, I'm gonna rate this 9 out of 10 as well, for the simple fact what you've mentioned, Thrash. I would have liked to have seen at least one samurai battle, like seeing the closest to even a samurai battle was when Lady well, not just that, but when Lady Mikio's her husband's fighting him on the dock. But you didn't see much bloodshed happen. You just see him kind of trying to get out of the situation and go somewhere. But yeah, 9 out of 10. But 100% an amazing show. I've loved reviewing this with you two guys. It has been a hell of a ride to watch this. I wish we could have got really in depth with the plot, but like I say, we would have been here for 10 hours. Yeah. And trust me and Anubis have done like a 4 to 5 hour conversation about Godzilla before. So, there's only so much time in the day. But we'll go to DJ Anubis. What do you have coming up on the Metal Tavern Radio?
Well, nothing super soon. Hopefully Neko and I will do a review of Maryland Death Fest, whatever fun we had and whatever stuff I pick up, like merch or whatever, might show off a little bit of that. Next Friday, I'm hoping to do another Classic Reflections with her, doing Static X's Wisconsin Death Trip record. And I still have an Ombach review that I've been promising for like over a month to do. I haven't done that yet. And then next Cinematic Synergy with you, Kevin. But I have to figure out what we're going to watch and do that.
So, Mr. Thrash, what's coming up on your lovely retro channel?
Well, this Sunday, as always, I do live chats on Sunday, 7:30 p.m. That's Eastern Standard Time, Eastern Coast Time. Tonight, this coming week's theme, we're going to be discussing the place of morality in post-apocalyptic cinema, and the specific template we will be discussing is A Boy and His Dog.
And that sounds interesting. When it comes to Sunday, I might be there. I might pop in for a little bit.
Thank you. Hopefully you both of you gentlemen are welcome, and hopefully both of you can make it. Also standard stuff as well. I have an ongoing series where I talk about vintage and contemporary sci-fi film and literature, and I'm doing a retrospect now on vintage Saturday morning cartoons.
Oh, cool. As for me in the entertainment headquarters, what will be coming here? Well, I do know on Thursday the new trailer for the second Beetlejuice film drops. Ooh. So not probably Thursday, but on Friday I'll probably do a trailer reaction to the new trailer. I might put up a few little hidden surprises on the channel, but coming the week after, I have my little trip to Romania coming up. So I'm going to Romania for 4 days, and you weren't there right at the beginning, Thrash, but my first content in October last year when I officially launched the channel, I dedicated October to Bram Stoker's Dracula. And I did a Francis Ford Coppola Dracula review with two other amazing YouTubers. I then went and travelled to the seaside town of Whitby, and I visited the Abbey, and I did the Dracula experience there. And I'm going to finish off the whole Dracula experience and come full circle and head over to Transylvania and have a look at the castles that inspired Bram Stoker and do a mini personal blog about my experience there. Outside of that, I do know Mr. DJ Anubis. When we schedule it, we have the next retro classic movie show coming up, which will be Duel, his choice, by Steven Spielberg. Yeah,
Speaking
and then
of TV movies.
Yep.
Absolutely. So you can always hop on with that one when we schedule it, Mr. Thrash, if it's interesting. And also, I think there's the only two other bits of content I have come in is that me and DJ Anubis will be doing an Into the Darkness segment, and we'll be doing a double review on 2 horror films, spider-based, creature feature-based, called Sting and Infested. And another Into the Darkness segment will be the Pumpkinhead franchise discussion. So they're coming to the entertainment headquarters real soon when we get them all scheduled. But from myself, from Mr. Thrashpondo Pons and DJ Anubis, like I always say, keep enjoying your movies, keep on enjoying your television, keep on enjoying all things entertainment, and we'll catch us all at the next one. Peace out. Night, everyone. Take care.